Hi, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Good morning or good afternoon, maybe good evening, depending on where you are. I don't know, but hello. Thank you all so much for being here. Welcome to our webinar on creating simple, streamlined, safe routes to school project action plans. Happy to have you all here today. It should be a really great session and a two-parter. So this is part one of a two-part conversation. I'm here, Corey Johnson with the Safe Routes Partnership. Here with my wonderful colleague, Laura. Laura, if you want to say a quick hello.
Hi, everybody. I'm Laura Harris, Technical Assistance Manager with a partnership currently based in New Orleans, Louisiana.
Yes, and I'm coming to you all from Baltimore, Maryland, where the sun is shining, which I'm very happy about because it's been clouds and rain and snow and all kinds of stuff for the past few weeks. So I'm excited to be moving past that, at least for the little time, for the time being, getting some sunshine in my life. As people join in, if you all want to say a quick hello in the chat, just share your name, where you're joining from, your connection to Safe Routes, and then also if you have a Safe Routes project that you are either in the process of implementing or hope to implement, we'd love to hear a little bit about what you all are working on. So I'll give people a few minutes to get settled in, say a quick hello. Tyler Ruth, consultant also in Baltimore. Thanks for kicking us off. Neighbor, nice to nice to see you here. We'd love for just to see who's here and joining us today. We always love that we have a nice, large national audience and people who are doing great work across the country. So say a quick hello. Let us know your connection to Safe Routes, and if you have a Safe Routes project that you're either implementing or you hope to implement in the next year, we'd love to hear about that too, since we're talking all about taking those project ideas and putting them into some solid action plans. So I'll give people a moment to jump in and say hello, see where people are joining in from. Seems like we have some Safe Routes Safe Routes newbies, so some new people to Safe Routes, and also people who've been doing Safe Routes for a long time. So let's see what's happening here in the chat. What's going on? Ryan Harris, I see you in the chat. Starting an after-school bike club on Friday. Awesome. It's a wonderful time to be out biking and rolling around. Let's see. Olivia in Somerset County. First walking school bus. I've been hearing a lot of people talk about getting their walking school buses up and going, maybe some new ones or restarting some ones from the fall. Who else do we have? What other Safe Routes projects are happening? Let's see. Ryan Hughes in Lexington, Kentucky. Great bike bus that you want to build momentum for. Yes, lots of biking and rolling happening these days. Some people currently exploring safe routes. Awesome. All right, so we'll keep the chat open throughout our webinar. So feel free to, jump in, say hello, share any thoughts or ideas or resources that you all have. We always love to hear from you. So for those of you who might be kind of new to Safe Routes and new to our organization, we are the Safe Routes Partnership. Our mission is to advance safe walking, biking, and rolling, both to schools, but also to other destinations, parks, libraries, rec centers, health centers, those everyday destinations where people go, and really focus on building and improving the health and well-being of people of all races, income levels, abilities, and disabilities, and really thinking about building healthy, thriving communities. And we do a lot of work with Safe Routes to School. And so we're kind of here to talk about some of the Safe Routes to School action plan work today. As I mentioned, I'm Corey. I'm co-hosting this webinar with Laura, and this webinar is a part of our Colorado Safe Routes to School series, which is generously funded by Colorado Safe Routes to School and the Colorado Department of Transportation. So huge shout out to our partners at CDOT for continuing to offer these webinars and for allowing people outside of Colorado to come and join us and learn with us. I guess I'll also preface this by saying that while this is a national webinar, that some of the things we'll be talking about are really focused on Colorado and Colorado's Safe Routes to School grant process. So I will be making some references to things that are very Colorado specific, but you're also welcome to go back to your own communities and see what the process looks like as you all are working on your action plans and grant proposals. So while there might be some Colorado specific information, there are also a lot of things that can be applied generally to Safe Routes to School projects. So with that being said, I do have a few Colorado Safe Routes to School updates. One is that Colorado recently released a refreshed version of their Safe Routes to School curriculum materials, which we will drop in the chat in a moment. I get a lot of questions asking about Colorado or asking about Safe Routes to School curriculum and materials. And Colorado is one state that's been really working on developing their Safe Routes to School curriculum materials. So I will drop that link here. I'll also send it out at the in my follow-up email. So if you missed it in the chat, I will definitely share that out again. I also mentioned that we have, this is part one of a two-part webinar. So part two will be on Tuesday, April 7th. We'll dive a bit deeper into Safe Routes to School action planning and project planning. And we'll have one final Colorado webinar of the year on Tuesday, May 12th. So more information is coming about that soon. And again, I'll also put that in the follow-up email. And then a few just Zoom reminders before we go ahead and get started for today. I think a lot of you who've been on our webinars know that we keep our comments in the comment box. If you have, want to react to something or share a resource or an idea, the chat box is a great place to do that. We'll have time for Q&A at the end. So if you have a question, make sure that you take a look at the Q&A box. Sometimes it's hidden in your toolbar under the More section. So if you can't find the Q&A box, click the three little dots that say More, and you should see the Q&A box pop up there. And then we're also recording this webinar and we'll share it afterwards. So if you missed something or want to do a rewatch or share it with colleagues, you all will get the link. And it'll also be posted on our website along with the slide deck. So if you missed something, don't worry, we will share it afterwards. All right, so we're going to go ahead and jump in and start talking about Safe Routes to School action plans and how to create an action plan for a Safe Routes project that you might be working on. And again, as I mentioned, that we've kind of structured this conversation around the Colorado Safe Routes to School grant application, but I think that a lot of these apply very broadly to different types of Safe Routes projects and Safe Routes applications. So please think about how you can adapt this information to fit the community that you're working with. In Colorado, as a part of the Colorado Safe Routes to School grant application process, an action plan is required for both infrastructure and non-infrastructure applications. So this includes planned activities, deliverables, expected results or outcomes, the estimated time frame, the responsible staff or agency, and also how the project will reach disproportionately impacted populations. So again, this is required if you're joining us from Colorado and you're looking to apply for a Colorado Safe Routes to School grant. This is information that is required as part of your application. More information about the grant process will be coming a bit later this year, but just wanted to get you all thinking early about what you need to do to get ready to apply here. And then specifically, and again, this is Colorado's application, your individual states might have different requirements, but again, these are some really just great general best practices. Your action plan has to describe how you will evaluate the success of your project, how you plan on sustaining your efforts once the project is finished, once the grant funds have been expended, how you'll share your information with the community once your project finishes, how the project will impact the larger community, and the steps that you'll take to achieve your project goals. So the idea is really to set your project up for success, not just during the project period, but also once the project wraps up. How can it continue going on, and how can the benefits and impact still be felt even after the grant funds have been spent? And so what we did was really created a simple and streamlined action plan that'll really help you, figure out what those steps are to move your project from the ideation phase all the way to the finished phase. And so I'm going to start by doing a very quick action plan overview and share a new resource that we've created, and then kind of like walk through the different parts of the action plan. Again, if you all have questions or comments along the way, please feel free to let us know. Laura and I will also be asking you a little bit to share some of your action plan, ideas and strategies and goals for projects that you all have coming up. So we'd love for you all to interact with us as we go through the presentation. So basically, when you're thinking about, your action plan and why we do action planning in the first place, your action plan is really your roadmap. So thinking about where do you want to start, and then where do you want to end, and then how will you get there? And the idea of the plan is that it really it helps you walk us through, through that journey. If you're thinking about this in terms of, applying for a grant or putting together a proposal, A lot of people who are reading your application, but might not know a lot about your community or your project. And so this is a chance for you to kind of walk through step by step what your project looks like and show that you're really prepared and ready to lead your project to a successful completion. And so Laura and I, we've been talking a lot about these checklists. For those of you who are on our outreach webinar in February, we created an outreach checklist, and we've done something similar with Safe Routes to School action planning and creating an action plan checklist to kind of help you think about what to include in an action plan as you're developing a Safe Routes to School project. And a checklist or a little, short guide is really nice because it helps you kind of like organize all of your thoughts. If there are certain requirements that are a part of your, grant application or project plan, it just helps to keep everything in one place. It can help you determine your goals and objectives and also plan for community engagement. And the action plan checklist includes a few different elements, one being the project title, timeline, a brief description of your project, your SMART goals, which we'll talk about in a moment, overview of the budget, your project team and partners. Who are you working with? Who's involved? A lot of our Safe Routes projects involve lots of different partners and players to make sure that we, get to our successful completion. So who's a part of your team? Who will you be working with? And then other considerations, community engagement. How's the community being involved in your Safe Routes project? We know that a lot of Safe Routes projects, the engagement piece is really important. And so what does that look like? Equity considerations. So how is your project impacting people who might be disproportionately impacted by, barriers to safe walking, biking, and rolling? What's your implementation plans once things are ready to go? What does implementation look like? Again, how are those different project partners involved? Evaluation is also a really big part of action planning. So we do all this work and we want to make sure, one, that it's rooted in, in some sort of data. And then two, thinking about, we do this plan and then did it work? Did it not work? What needs to change or what needs to be adjusted? So the evaluation piece is really important. And lastly, how are we sustaining those efforts once the project ends? So making sure that the impacts can still go on once the project is finished. And that can even include planning for another project or round two. So I did put together, and I'm going to share this after the webinar is finished, but I did create a action plan checklist here that is a Google Drive version, but I'll also share this as a Word doc, and I'll also link the slide deck from today in the webinar recording. But this is basically just what I went through and what Laura and I are going to talk through today, but just as like a Word doc version. So if you all want to, work on your individual action plans, as you work through your projects, you can use this example as a guide. So I will share this afterwards with the updated links for you all, and I'll share it both as a Drive link and then also as an actual Word doc in case you don't have access to Drive. So I just want to make sure you all know that that is coming soon. Okay, so kind of diving into what goes into your action plan and really starting with the basics. The basics are project title. So what is it that you're doing? And making sure that that title is nice and clear. Clear and catchy is also nice. If you have a creative title that explains what you're doing, that's great. Your project timeline, so the period when your project will take place. Again, if you're thinking about using a project plan to apply for a grant, please make sure that your timeline is aligned with the grant, period timelines, making sure that your project starts and ends within the grant period. That's really important. And also a brief project description. So what will the project accomplish? Where is it located? What barrier or problem will the project address? Who's going to benefit? And then also, how does your project connect to an existing plan? If you have an existing Safe Routes to School plan, a comprehensive plan, a bike ped plan, a Vision Zero plan, being able to show alignment between your project and an existing plan is great. And even things, even thinking about how to align evaluation in an existing plan with your project plan is also really important. For those of you who might not be familiar with Vision Zero, I know that Vision Zero is a thing in some communities, not in other communities. Vision Zero is is an effort to eliminate all serious injuries and road fatalities. And usually there's a specific date tied towards that. So communities are kind of working towards this zero number of deaths and serious injuries and fatalities on their roadways. And so there are some communities that have their own Vision Zero plans that kind of outline, different safety strategies and projects that are really aimed at improving road safety. So if you're thinking about if you're thinking about coming up with a project idea and there's an existing project or idea or strategy in a Vision Zero plan, that's another great way to kind of create that connection between Vision Zero and safe routes to school. And I'm happy to share more information about Vision Zero in a follow-up email as well and share what a Vision Zero plan looks like. So those are kind of like the basics of your safe routes action plan. And next is really thinking about what are those goals and objectives. So once you have your project idea, once you know what you're doing, and you kind of have a sense of what you want to work towards, spending some time really narrowing down what the goals and objectives of your project really are. And again, this is something that's Colorado specific, but please do make sure that you're referencing grant applications in your community or proposal requirements for your community. But again, I think these are also just some general great best practices when it comes to action planning. So Colorado Safe Routes to School, their grant requires you to list out your different SMART goals and objectives, and I'll talk about what SMART goals are in a moment. So Colorado requires that you have a minimum of 3 goals and at least 1 objective per goal, and a list of activities and actions to help you meet the objective. And I'll share examples of what this looks like. This applies both to infrastructure and non-infrastructure projects. So whether you're doing a construction project or you're doing a non-infrastructure project, you need to make sure that you have at least 3 goals with your with your objectives and activities outlined in your action plan. So I mentioned the SMART goals. I think some of you might know what SMART goals are, but if you don't or need a refresher, SMART goals and objectives are specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time phased. So that's kind of like a nice way to remember when you're trying to craft your goals, making sure that it includes each one of these different elements to make a really strong and achievable goal or objective. So when it comes to your action steps and activities, those must include what the desired outcome is. So, you do this activity and then what happens? How are you going to measure the deliverable, the estimated time frame, and then also who's responsible. And I think the piece about who's responsible is really important because, again, a lot of our work is really collaborative. It involves a lot of different people and moving pieces. So thinking early on about who's responsible for doing what is a really great way to be, planning thoughtfully and planning realistically, and also helps make sure that you're engaging your partners really early on in the process. If somebody is responsible for something, you don't want to go to the last minute and say, hey, you're supposed to be doing X, Y, and Z. So, being able to kind of collaborate and make sure everybody's on the same page early is really important. So I'm going to walk you through a few sample goals and objectives just so y'all can get a sense of what they look like, how they sound. Feel free to kind of use this as a guide as you're coming up with goals and objectives and activities for the action plans that you all are making. And we're going to dive deeper into goals and objectives during our next session. So this is more of a broad overview. Next session, we'll get more into the nitty-gritty here. So this is an example of just examples of non-infrastructure projects. Again, I think a lot of you know what these are. You even mentioned some of them in the chat. So things like bike rodeos, crossing guard programs, public awareness campaigns, remote drop-off and pickup, walking school buses, bike trains, bike ped safety lesson plans are all examples of what non-infrastructure, of examples of safe routes to school non-infrastructure projects. And then thinking about sample goals and objectives, here's one example. This is actually one from the Colorado Safe Routes to School grant application guidelines. So this is a sample goal for a non-infrastructure project. So the goal is to create a culture that supports walking, rolling, and biking to school at Hilltop Elementary School. So that's one goal that's tied to, that can be tied to a non-infrastructure project. And then after the goal is listed, there are a few different objectives that'll help achieve that goal. So the first objective, by April 30th, 2026, hosts 3 special events for at least 75% of students, highlighting the benefits of walking, rolling, and riding to and from school. And then under the objective, there are a few different activities. Create a tracking system to record the number of students attending each event, and then who's leading that, who's the responsible party. The lead wellness champion will be responsible for that part. Another activity, work with school leadership to identify dates for each event at the start of the school year so that appropriate planning efforts can happen. Who's the lead person? The principal. Another activity that'll help reach this, reach this objective. Download and customize plan and available on Safe Routes to School website to create an action plan and budget for each event, including getting donations and sponsors. So there can even be plans within plans, right? We have our big project plan, and that can also lead to smaller event plans and smaller project plans, depending on what it is that you're working with. And there's the lead person responsible for it, the lead wellness champion, and the Safe Routes committee. So this is an example of a way that you can structure the goals and objectives part of your action plan. What's the goal? What's the objective? What are those activities? And then who's the responsible party? And it all leads up to being able to achieve or fulfill that, that main goal. I'll share a few more examples just to give you all a sense of what a few other goals and objectives look like. And again, if you have questions or if there are things that come up, or maybe you might do your, goals and objectives a different way, feel free to drop it in the chat, drop a question in the Q&A. We can definitely talk through this more either during the Q&A section or during our next webinar. So another objective related to the same goal. The goal is to create a culture that supports walking, biking, and rolling. Second objective could be to distribute a survey to all students to establish baseline knowledge and culture, to establish a baseline of the knowledge and culture of the school. So that's the second objective, figure out where students are now when it comes to their knowledge around walking and biking. What is the activity? Research and create your survey. The health department will do that. Work with staff to ensure that the survey is ADA accessible, provided in needed languages of the school community, and is grade level appropriate. The principal will do that. And then create a communications to distribute to all the teachers and staff regarding how to distribute the survey, analyze those results, and then make notes and report findings to the Safe Routes to School committee. Who will do that? The local health agency will do that. So again, this is really taking the goal, the objective, and then breaking down the actual action steps. What is the process of making sure that you're actually achieving, this objective and following through? I'll also say that when it comes to action planning, we know that we need to be flexible and that things happen in this world, and that while we have a plan, that sometimes things change. We might need to be a little bit flexible here. So I won't speak for CDOT, but I know that with a lot of the plans that I create, I say that this is the plan that we have. There's room to adjust as needed or as we get more information. So also don't feel like you have to be, completely tied to each step if something changes or something comes up and you need to adjust. We know that happens all the time. And lastly, just one more example for non-infrastructure. Again, the same goal of creating a culture of walking and biking. Objective 3, distribute surveys to all the students to understand the impact of special events, walk and roll to school day, bike and roll to school day. Send out a survey, distribute the survey, collect and analyze your results. And then again, who's going to do that? Who's going to be in charge? Principal, health agency partner, maybe Safe Routes to School coordinator. So these are, again, just a few examples. There are lots of ways to do goals and objectives. There are lots of examples of what great goals and objectives look like, but I wanted to kind of share again the structure of having your goal, your objective, your activity, and the responsible party. So if nothing else, just remember that the structure, where did I put it? Oh, that this structure right here with the goal, objective, activity, and responsible party is a nice structure to follow when you're thinking about creating your goals and objectives. I also wanted to share a quick infrastructure example because infrastructure plans are also, infrastructure project goals and objectives are also really important. Again, another note for our CDOT, our Colorado folks, is that CDOT grants, you can apply for design and construction, but CDOT does not fund planning. So if you're applying for planning, that is not funded with CDOT Safe Routes to School programs. Again, in your community or your state, it might be different, so check your grant requirements. And also that all CDOT infrastructure projects must include an education component. So just make sure to keep that in mind if you're from Colorado looking to apply for an infrastructure grant. And again, infrastructure projects can include things like signage, bike and pedestrian counters, street striping, sidewalk improvements, traffic calming, bike and pedestrian crossing improvements. So if you're somebody who's thinking about infrastructure, definitely, think about what type of project you want to apply for. Again, go back and look at some of those existing plans to see what infrastructure projects might already be included or, in the works, and see if you can come up with an infrastructure project idea from an existing plan and connect that to Safe Routes to School. Like I mentioned, for CDOT, all the infrastructure project plans must include an education component. And this is really a way for you to think about how you can enhance your project. So if you're doing a sidewalk construction project or a signage project, what type of educational component can really help enhance or advance that infrastructure project? So is it doing a bike rodeo? Is it doing a pedestrian skills workshop? If you're, creating new sidewalks, is it creating student walking and biking maps, or a public awareness campaign, or bike skills training, or safe routes to school assembly? So once the infrastructure and once the project is, on the ground and complete, how can you enhance it through something educational, education related? And I'll go through this quickly because I'll make sure we get to the rest of our content here. But this is an example of an infrastructure goal. Increase connectivity among walking routes for students in our community. So this would be for like a sidewalk construction project, let's say. So the first objective is to get the sidewalks installed along a set of walking routes that have been identified in an existing town master plan. The activities kind of go through the process of getting a sidewalk installed. So everything from, pulling the project location, sending it to bid, getting the design finished and complete, coordinating the installation, and then installing it. And again, who's doing what? So is it transportation? Is it public works? Does the engineer need to be involved? Who are the responsible parties for each activity? And then we talked about that education component. So your other parts of your action plan might be related to the education piece. So once the sidewalks are installed, they look great, students are ready to use them. And then your next objective might be to publish a walking routes map to distribute to schools so that all the students know, hey, we have new sidewalks, here are the new walking maps, here's where you can go to actually walk to school now where there might not have been a sidewalk before. So again, what do those activities look like? Who's creating the maps? Who's reviewing and approving the maps? And then who's distributing the maps? And then lastly, again, with this larger goal of increasing connectivity and getting more students walking and biking to school, you've installed the sidewalks, you've done the maps, and maybe now you want to host a few pedestrian safety skills workshops to kind of get kids understanding what it means to walk, what pedestrian safety looks like in their community. So you might offer 2 education workshops at a local library to get students to learn about walking safely. And so these kind of break down the steps of getting those workshops set up. So seeing who needs the workshops, what grades, what communities, scheduling the workshops, doing the training session, doing some evaluation, and then following up with participants afterwards. So again, it has both the infrastructure piece of installing the sidewalks and then also the education piece with doing some student walking maps, and then also doing some pedestrian skills training at a local library. So that's a very, again, quick overview of goals and objectives. We'll go into this more during part 2, but this is kind of just like a general review of goals and objectives. I've been talking a lot, and I would love to hear from you all, so I'm going to turn things over to you in a moment, and we have a nice mentee set up. Give me a second. I'll pull it up for you all. We would like to know, let me know if my screen is showing the mentee here.
You're good.
Good. So we would like to know, what is one goal that you might have for a Safe Routes to School project in your community? So I just showed a few goals and objectives, and I'd love to hear from you all about if you have a a goal for a Safe Routes project that you're working on. So those of you who might be doing bike rodeos or walking school buses or planning different Safe Routes events over the next few months, what is one goal that you all have for the projects that you're working on? And so we will give this a moment here. There we go. Lots of community input, creative crosswalks, have the community want to do it again. I love that, just as like a general, positive outcome. Engaging more schools in weekly or monthly walking events. Great. Engaging with new schools, pop-up traffic garden, bike rodeos, to get everyone understanding traffic expectations, to build awareness for walking and biking, safe crossings across Main Street, finish and implement our action plan, perform a walk audit at 2 elementary schools, establishing a network of reliable school champions. That's a good one. Increase bike walk to school day activities to educate parents. Implement more traffic calming features to slow down vehicles. Successful storybook walks. Whoever said that is speaking to my heart. Build excitement around Safe Routes events. Yes. Awesome. All right, so we will hold on to these as well. We can also share these afterwards. If you're trying to think about a Safe Routes goal or project for your community, you might be able to use this list to come up with some good ideas. All right, so I'm going to shift back to our presentation here. And just talk really quickly about 2 other parts of this before I turn things over to Laura to round us out for today. I won't go too much into budget and project team and partners, but just know that some project plans might ask you to include a budget overview, and that might be a part of your actual action plan or might be a separate part of a grant application. So just be aware that if you are working with your budget and need to include that in your action plan, that you definitely can. Again, consult your application for specific budget requirements, and then also list of your project team and partners. So any key staff, partners, stakeholders, who else will be working with you to help implement your action plan. And lastly, community engagement. We talk about community engagement a lot during these webinars, especially our Colorado webinars, because we have our wonderful Colorado Community Engagement Guide. But please be mindful of when you're thinking about your action plan, how you'll involve communities in the development and implementation of your project. So if you're doing a bike rodeo, or if you're doing a traffic garden, or if you're doing even like a sidewalk project or a crosswalk project, how will the community be involved, and how will they be involved both in the development, implementation, and then also sustaining the efforts afterwards? Also, how will you ensure the community members experience the most barriers to safe walking, biking, and rolling, make sure that they're able to participate? And then also, how will you share information with the community, with schools, and with families? So if there's a bike rodeo happening, if there are new sidewalks that are being installed, how will you share that out? You're going to send out a newsletter, social media, word of mouth, community health workers, local media, TV, newspaper, radio. How will you make sure that people are aware that these projects are actually happening, happening with advance notice, so that it's not just like sprung up on them, like, hey, you're getting a new sidewalk, or hey, there's a bike lane now. And of course, there are a lot of wonderful community engagement activities, listening sessions, design charrettes, walk audits, bike rodeos, outreach tabling, open house events, walking and rolling contest, even creating a Safe Routes to School task force or committee. All of those are great ways for you to kind of build in more community engagement. And if any of these are part of your, project plan, make sure that you include them. So if you're going to do a listening session, make sure that that's outlined in your plan. If you're going to do a bike rodeo or host an open house, make sure that that's laid out in your plan, maybe as one of your, project activities. And then again, just a little note about reducing barriers to participation, thinking about things like where you're holding meetings, if you need to plan or budget for interpreters, translators, food, childcare, thinking about the time that you'll be hosting your meetings, any sort of required equipment, whether it's bikes, helmets, umbrellas, rain gear. We know that rain and weather can be a barrier to participating in some Safe Routes activities. And then also collaborating with partners who are already connected to the community. So who else can you bring in to help enhance your project? So there are a lot of other great examples of community engagement in our Colorado Community Engagement Guide with best practices, guiding questions, case studies. We have a bunch of like past community engagement webinars and trainings if you want to take a look at those as well. So if there's anything else that's community engagement related, I encourage you to take a look at our some of our existing community engagement resources. And I'll also share the link to this guide in my follow-up email. So I'm going to end here and hand things over to Laura to talk a bit about some equity considerations when it comes to creating safe routes to school project plans.
Thanks, Corey. You did an amazing job going through so much information in 30 minutes.
Yes.
I'm going to walk everyone through the latter half of our checklist here. So next slide here. So we want to build equity into our action plan. Equity is a major principle of safe routes to school programs. We know that, some communities are going to greater barriers to safe travel than other communities. There's going to be things like big gaps in infrastructure, various traffic safety concerns, areas that have limited access to resources. So we want to make sure that our action plan is going to consider how our projects are going to support these underserved communities. I always love, if folks haven't seen this graphic of how to explain equity, I really like this image because it shows we can't just give everyone the same bike. We want to give people the bike that fits to them. So kind of thinking about what we need to give different communities, what they need to access safe biking and walking might look different for different communities. Next slide. And so one way you can help kind of prioritize what communities you want to really focus on addressing first, knowing that maybe we can't equally put our efforts everywhere. We want to think about things like using census data to get information on what might look like more of an underserved community. There's a lot of great data sources out there, things like environmental data, places that are more negatively impacted by environmental concerns, places that have higher crash rates and injuries, low income communities. And rural communities are traditionally underserved. So we really want to make sure we're using the data that's out there to support equitable investment in our action plans. Okay, the next part of the action plan is implementation. This part I'm sure can feel very daunting. Implementation will involve lots of different kinds of steps. So one way we can help kind of break it down is to break it into three phases. First, our planning phase within implementation, the actual implementation itself, and then our post-project activities and evaluation. So before the project begins, the planning phase of implementation, these are some of the parts that we might want to be doing before. So that might look like coordinating with community partners who are all the schools, caregivers, other community engagements, folks that work with the city, who are all the partners that we want to have be a part of this plan. Start communicating with them early, as well as community outreach, which Corey touched on. Our school engagement, the schools are going to be a huge partner in this. Our data collection that we just mentioned, kind of gathering all the information that we want to feed into the plan. We want to do caregiver surveys, we want to do tallies, things like that. We'll talk about that a little bit more, as well as kind of any kind of designs that you might want to potentially be incorporating into your project. These are all things you can do in this planning stage. Next slide. So our implementation phase of the plan, so this is where we're actually delivering our programs or events. So these can include like education programs that could be during school, after school with community organizations. This could also include bike and walk events like Bike and Roll to School Day. This could include installing our temporary demonstrations. Perhaps you're doing a pop-up walkway to school. I know that there's some communities interested in doing that. Helping kind of make temporary connections to show what could be possible in the bigger picture of what you're aiming towards in your plan. You also want to be monitoring the project progress. We want to make sure we're evaluating the conditions before, during, and after our plan here. Next slide. And then our post-project activities, that's a big part of that is our evaluation. So taking our, updated tallies and evaluating are more students biking and walking, doing caregiver surveys. We want to share these outcomes with the community. So, hey, look at these great stories we've had from this. More students are biking and walking, really communicate that this plan that they were a part of is actually making a difference. And we also want to identify any potential opportunities to, improve upon our plan and continue this work. So the next phase of the action plan is evaluation. Evaluation is super important. We want to make sure that we are collecting data before our plan begins, and after. So we want to be able to show we want to be able to demonstrate that our plan did something with something that we can actually measure. So that can look like travel tallies, something like here. So that's actually just basically counting which students are biking, which students are driving, carpooling, or taking the bus, and then doing that before and after to kind of get some of that data. Caregiver surveys are a great way to collect a lot of really insightful information that might help you kind of identify barriers that you hadn't thought about, maybe barriers that have nothing to do with infrastructure, that could be solved in some other ways. Um, Another way to evaluate is event participation tracking. So if you do walk and roll to school events, education programs, other kind of biking, walking events, just tracking the amount of participation you have, and hopefully you have more and more participation as your plan goes on. And of course, safety data. We want to evaluate how many crashes we're having before and after our plan. Did maybe this certain infrastructure, this intersection was just, notoriously dangerous for crashes. It was happening all the time. And now maybe you can say, look, we've only had, X number of crashes versus Z number of crashes last year. Safety data is super important in helping show the importance of this work.
Can I make one more note about safety data too, Laura? That
Yeah.
before when I was talking about aligning your plan with like with existing plans, some of that safety data might be able to be pulled from like an existing Safe Routes to School plan or an existing Vision Zero plan or another project plan where they've already looked at some of the current data and have identified areas of concern, intersections of concern. So when you're thinking about evaluation and maybe you're thinking about where to do your project or how to prioritize the communities in your project, and you want to connect that back to your action plan, you can pull some of the data that already, that might already exist in your community. So just as you're thinking about evaluation and even just, project ideation, make sure you're thinking about being able to pull data that, might already exist somewhere. Maybe it's another plan or another project proposal, and seeing if that can align with the project action plan that you're working on. Thanks,
Yeah,
Laura.
great point. And when you want to think about like what are some actual, evaluation metrics, things I could share, measurable outcomes of this would include things like an increase in the number of students biking, walking, and rolling, positive responses from those caregiver surveys, reduction in crashes, increased participation, visible reduction in potentially school drop-off congestion. These are all things to prove our success. Next slide. So qualitative feedback is also really important in addition to having numbers. It's great to have numbers. Grant applications love to have that kind of data, but we also love to have real stories. We love to have images. Having a visual change is super powerful, and being able to communicate that is a big part of this. So we want to make sure that we're collecting feedback in qualitative ways. We're actually having conversations, listening to families, to schools, to students, hearing those stories, the success stories, sharing those out, finding great case studies of, sharing the stories of someone who maybe changed their behavior based on programs that were implemented as part of this action plan.
Yeah, and like as you're putting together your goals and objectives and you're thinking about how you'll share back these stories and you're thinking about what those activities are and who might be responsible for doing some of these things, you're, local communications team or even like local media, how can they be involved in your project plan? So if you're doing a, bike and roll to school day and you want to bring in a, photographer or a local journalist to capture bike and roll to school day, you can add them into your project plan just as a reminder, like, oh, hey, I'm planning this bike rodeo event, or even with an infrastructure project, we're doing, some new signage. We have a new signal coming. We are, constructing, new sidewalks. How are we going to spread the word to, the wider community? That can be a great opportunity to partner with some of your, like local media partners, communications teams. So that's another part of this planning process, right? Who needs to be involved and who can do what? And it's also a great way to kind of like get some of this off of your plate. So if so you're not the one running around taking all the pictures or, writing articles. Who can you partner with? Who can, kind of play a part of sharing that story of your project as well.
Yeah, having a communications plan from the beginning built in and kind of thinking about how you're going to communicate to the community that you're doing this plan in the first place is going to help people feel like they were a part of it from the beginning. So that's a great point as well. Okay, now it's your turn to share. So we have another
We have
open-ended
another new
poll
tippy.
here.
Yeah,
Okay,
this
so
one, oh, sorry, go ahead, Laura.
oh, go ahead.
I was going to say this one kind of came about because we always get a lot of questions about evaluation and safe routes to school, and it's something that I think we're all continuing to learn about. So as Laura and I working this presentation, we were like, we have these evaluation tips or ideas, but if you all have evaluation tips and best, tips and strategies and tricks that have worked for you, we would love to hear, how you all do your evaluation and what strategies and tips you can share with the rest of us. Communicate early and often. Keep evaluation methods in mind from the very beginning of planning. Tracking participation with the weekly tally and offering rewards to those who participate. People love a good treat, a good giveaway, a nice little incentive. Classroom friendly competitions. Evaluation is tough, currently in participating limbo. Yes, evaluation is tough. It can be tricky. That's why we're kind of trying to get some crowdsourced ideas now, because it can be kind of hard to crack. Let's see. Calculating the number of new feet of sidewalk installed year over year. That's a good one. Uh, Involving students like green teams and tallying activities, establish some metrics in your control and some metrics that are related to outcomes. Love that. For projects that are not getting support, leverage safety and school support for project development. Great. If anybody has any others, go ahead and drop them now. And again, we'll save this and share it out afterwards and can discuss more in part two. All right, I'm going to shift back so you have time for wrapping up in Q&A.
Okay, so we want to make sure that we sustain the success of all the great programs that we're implementing as part of our Safe Routes to School plan. Um, so one part of that, I think this slide should have actually been a little the earlier ones, but again, sharing our success. So we want to make sure that we're really communicating that this is working. So folks are going to be on board for continuing to participate in some of the programs and activities or potential being advocates for some of the infrastructure projects that this plan might involve. So again, communicating all steps of the way to build that long-term support. Next slide. So other ways to sustain and expand the work of our action plan is, to continue to apply for funding to keep it going. It's kind of a bummer when you like get funding for this really cool project and then it's like, well, it's over now and that was it. So finding ways to make sure that you can have a continuous flow of funding to keep this going, not just so, two grades of students will get this really awesome program so that all the students for the foreseeable future could potentially be part of like a great bike and ped safety education program. Um, You also want to think about how to expand successful pilots. Like, cool, this demonstration project was a success. Now, how can we take the lessons learned from that and implement it all across the neighborhood or all across the city? So, thinking about ways to use those demonstration projects as part of the plan is just a stepping stone for creating that bigger vision. Um, Other ways include integrating lessons into policies and plans. So maybe we learned something interesting from an infrastructure pop-up that we could actually transform into a policy change or incorporate into an upcoming plan. So making sure we really take our feedback and evaluation and really do something with it. And then, of course, continuing those partnerships to make them sustainable to, go forward with some of the great policies and programs that you might be working on as part of the plan. Okay, so our key takeaways from today is that we want to have a strong action plan, which includes our very clear and smart objectives. We want to have strong partnerships. It's always the biggest puzzle piece in making a successful action plan and successful safe routes to school programs. Community engagement is absolutely key in every step of the way. Um, a program's no good if it doesn't build equity into it, and so we want to always be considering equity as we work through our action plans. We want to think about our various steps and implementation and make sure we have those defined as far as our pre-planning activities, our actual implementation phase, and our evaluation, and think about all those steps from the beginning so you can have a really effective plan. And we want to think about our long-term sustainability and make sure that we're really doing everything to continue the work so it's not just kind of like a one-time thing. This is just a stepping stone to creating that greater vision of making sure that all students can get around safely, biking, walking, and rolling. And
And now it's
then
question time.
question time.
Thanks, Laura, for rounding us out today. Yeah, thank you all for your, for your questions and comments in the chat. Like we said, this is just kind of like the introduction and an overview, and then in part two, we'll go more in depth into what an action plan looks like with an actual, like real safe routes to school project. So more to come, but I've appreciated your participation so far. And I'm going to take a look and see what is happening in the Q&A box. I did see that somebody asked if we can share the slides afterwards. Yes, so we will share the slide deck and the recording afterwards in case you missed anything or want to go back and take a look at anything. I'll share that along with the action plan guide that we put together too. That it's basically kind of like the Word doc version of this presentation. So it walks you through the different parts. It has some guiding questions. So I'll make sure that that gets sent out in the follow-up email. So a few questions. Let's see. There is one question about best ways to where is it? Oh, how do you suggest evaluating how many students are biking and walking to school? So I can go back to the evaluation slide, and then we can also share a few other examples. And also, if people have ideas in the chat as well, feel free to drop them in here. So a lot of schools will do what are called student travel tallies, which, like at the beginning of the school day, the teacher might ask the class, how did you get to school today? And students will be able to say, if they walked, if they drove, if they biked, if they did a scooter, if they took transit, maybe they did a combination of a few different things. And so we're able to take those student travel tallies and then help that, and then have that be a part of the data set that we use as a part of our as a part of our evaluation. So I'm happy to share more information about that. Melissa, I saw your hand up too. If you wanted to add on a little and share a few more examples of how you all do this, especially for Colorado, I would make sure that we are talking about the evaluation metrics that you all use in your grant application. So if you want to come off mute, you are welcome to.
Great. Thanks, Corey. I did want
Yeah.
to add something.
Yes.
So for this, what we require in Colorado are two different things for our application. So the student tallies and parent surveys. So I just wanted to pop on here and recommend the site that we use for the student tallies, which is bikewalkroll.org. And it's actually, I think, out of Canada. but it has a very easy user interface, and then it produces really nice reports, which are very easy just to incorporate into a grant application. So just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that resource. And then I know you're asking about students, but I also wanted to mention typically you're asked about parents and what their perceptions of safety and why they're letting or not letting their kids walk or bike to school. And so we have a parent survey that we developed. It was based off the national survey that closed years ago, and that's just a Google form. And so if anybody is interested in that, we're happy to share that, and you can modify it. But I think the takeaway should be there are so many resources available for free with Safe Routes to School that just ask and someone has something that you could use so you're not recreating anything. And that's
Yeah,
it.
thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks, Melissa. That's super helpful. And I think we did in our evaluation webinar from last year, I think that we talked about bike, walk, roll and like your Google form. So I'm also happy to share the recording from our last evaluation webinar because there are probably some extra like tips and resources in there that will be helpful. When you mentioned it, it just jogged my memory like, oh yes, we did that evaluation webinar and I think we talked about that one. So I can share that as well. Good question. Another question that I think is really timely, and maybe we can talk about this a bit more in our part two as well. How do you suggest writing in equity in a time when even the word equity could potentially get you denial for funding? Some people have had to rewrite grant applications or remove words like equity and diversity. And again, this might be something that also depends on your state or your community, but it's something that we've been thinking about a lot here at the partnership. Like, what language can you use that'll still show that you're leading towards equitable outcomes? Might not be able to use the word equity in in an application. So you've seen some communities that have just, kind of like relied very heavily on their data and have talked about, very specific, specific communities that they want to work with. So sometimes it's really, kind of like tying it to a specific data set, like, a lot of the crashes or serious injuries are happening, along this corridor. There's still some communities or some applications where, like you might say, low income, underserved, underrepresented, disproportionately impacted, communities of opportunity. We've heard that before. So I'm happy to again, in a follow-up email or in part two, kind of like share some of that recommended language that we've been seeing. Laura, I don't know if you've seen any others in applications that you've seen or communities that you've been working with, but those are ones that I've seen recently just in like federal grant applications that people have been submitting and how people have kind of like rephrased that language. I'll also say that we've also seen a lot of communities, especially with Safe Routes to School, really leaning on the idea of focusing on safety for students and families, kids and families, family friendly, improving walking and rolling routes for families. That's been another way that people have kind of been able to address equity and get safe routes projects funded and supported using some of like that language that's really tied towards something that'll benefit families. So those are a few tips I can think of off the bat, but Laura, if you have any others, happy to hear those too.
Yeah, that's great. I just dropped in the chat, like sometimes we use like the term comprehensive access also as sort of a placeholder for equity as another term.
Yeah. Okay, let's take one more question. And again, we'll save these questions. So if we don't get to them today, we have a part two coming in a few weeks. So we can circle back and answer some of these questions as well. Somebody else was asking if there's a matrix of typical data input needs and relevant stakeholders for these types of plans. So for example, you need crash data, how do you, how do you get that data? Who has it? Who might be responsible for that data collection piece? Who might have access to that data? I'm not sure if there's any sort of matrix like that, but we're happy in our next session to talk about kind of like different data that you might want to collect and then where you might be able to find it. If that's helpful. So like if you're looking for crash data, who has it? Is it the school district? Sometimes it's a police department, sometimes it's, DOT. So where can you find different types of data sets? And then where might you need to do your own data collection? We'll be happy to put together some suggestions about that too. And again, will depend on your community, but we can give some general suggestions. Okay, we are almost at time. There are so many wonderful questions. Like I said, we will keep them all. If we didn't get to them this time, we'll get them to you next time. I also saw some resources that were dropped in the chat, so we can share that afterwards as well. So a lot more coming in our follow-ups. Just a few quick next steps. Like I mentioned, we'll have part 2 of this action planning webinar on Tuesday, April 7th, same time, 11 a.m. Mountain. A little homework for you all. Once we send out all the resources and the slide deck and the action plan checklist, if you want to take a look at that, and if you have any additional questions, comments, things that you're interested in learning about, we can have you send those to our info email address, and we'll make sure that we include that in our follow-up session in April. So a lot more to come, a lot more resources, and a kind of a deeper dive into action planning. And one final announcement that is not action plan related, but is related to something else also really exciting. Our annual our 2026 Safe Routes to School National Conference is coming up in October in Minneapolis, and we want to hear from you. We want for you all to present and share your great work and your ideas. So our call for proposals is now open. Margot dropped our conference website in the chat box. Please feel free to jump in and submit a proposal. We'd love to hear from you and also see you in Minneapolis in October. So please make sure that you submit your proposals. They're due April 1st by 5 p.m. Eastern. So we'll send out lots of other reminders about that as well. So that is it for today. Thank you all so much for joining us. Again, huge thank you to CDOT for hosting this conversation. We really appreciate it. Thank you for sharing your links. And we're really excited about part 2. Stay tuned for a follow-up email from us. There'll also be a survey as you click out of the webinar today. So please take 30 seconds and let us know how we did, how we can improve for next time, what else you want to hear about. And we will see you in April for part 2. Also, if you attended this webinar, I think you're already registered for part 2, so you don't need to re-register. But those of you who might want to pass this along to other people, please do. Please feel free to do so. We would love to see you next time and continue talking more about action planning. So thank you all. Thank you, Melissa and Wendy from CDOT. Really appreciate it. Laura, co-host, thank you so much for
Thank you,
sharing
Corey.
your
That was
time.
awesome.
Yeah, always nice to facilitate these with you. And we'll see you all next time. Have a good one.